The carriage wheels ground to a halt on gravel that sounded wrong. Corvin Ashford, Duke of Ravencrest, opened his eyes to a house he barely recognized. Windhollow Manor stood gray against the October sky, its windows dark, its gardens overgrown, its grand entrance devoid of the welcoming party he'd imagined for 3 years of blood and cannon fire. No servants lined the drive. No father-in-law rushed forward with congratulations. No Theodine. Where was Theodine? He gripped the carriage door with his scarred hand, the one the surgeons had nearly taken after the siege at Voldenhurst, and forced himself to breathe. Perhaps they hadn't received word of his return. Perhaps the letter had gone astray. Perhaps. The front door opened. A woman emerged, slight, dark-haired, dressed in faded morning gray. She moved down the stone steps with careful precision, her hands clasped before her, her face pale as winter dawn. Corvin's mind scrambled to place her. She looked like Theodine, the same delicate bone structure, the same dark eyes, but wrong somehow. Quieter, dimmer, like a candle beside his fiancée's blazing torch. The sister. The name surfaced slowly. Malis, the younger one, the silent one. He'd met her perhaps twice before the war, both times in Theodine's shadow, both times forgettable. She stopped at the base of the steps and curtsied, her movements precise and formal. Then she lifted her gaze to his, and Corvin felt something tighten in his chest. Her eyes were not dim at all. They were deep, dark, and filled with something that looked terrifyingly like grief. "Where is your sister?" His voice came out harsher than intended, roughened by years of shouting orders across battlefields. "Where is Theodine?" Milas did not answer. She simply stood there, watching him with those impossible eyes, her lips pressed together in a thin line. "I asked you a question." Corvin descended from the carriage, ignoring the shooting pain in his left leg, another gift from Voldenhurst, and crossed the gravel toward her. "Where is my fiancée?" Milas lifted her hand slowly and made a series of gestures he didn't understand. Her fingers moved with fluid grace, forming shapes in the air between them. "What are you?" He stopped, stared. "You cannot speak?" She shook her head once, a small, dignified movement. Something cold crawled down Corvin's spine. He remembered now, fragments of conversation from before the war. Theodine laughing about her peculiar little sister who'd stopped speaking after their mother's death. He'd thought it an exaggeration, a family eccentricity. "Then write it." He gestured impatiently at the house. "Fetch paper, and tell me where your sister is." Milas studied him for a long moment. Then she reached into the pocket of her gray dress and withdrew a small leather journal and pencil, clearly kept ready for exactly this purpose. She wrote quickly, her handwriting elegant and sure, then turned the journal toward him. "Theodine left 14 months ago. She is not coming back." The words blurred before his eyes. "Left? What do you mean, left? We are engaged. We have been engaged for 4 years. She—" He snatched the journal from her hands, as if reading the words again might change them. But they remained fixed on the page, immutable as a death sentence. "She is not coming back." "Where did she go?" His voice cracked. He hated the sound of it. "Is she dead? Tell me she's not." Milas took the journal back gently, wrote again. "She is alive. She left with someone else." "I am sorry, Your Grace." Someone else. The ground seemed to tilt beneath Corvin's boots. 3 years. 3 years of holding on to the memory of Theodine's golden laugh, her promises written in perfumed letters, her vow to wait for him no matter how long the war lasted. 3 years of fighting to survive because he had someone to return to, and she had left with someone else. "When?" The word tore from his throat. "When did you know?" Milas wrote. "I knew the day she left. I wrote to you. Many times." I received nothing. Not a single. He stopped, a horrible realization dawning. The letters. I received no letters at all after the first year. I assumed the war had disrupted the post. Mylas's expression flickered. Pain, quickly suppressed. She wrote, I sent 47 letters. One each week for nearly a year, until I understood they were not reaching you. 47 letters. And he had received none of them. Who intercepted them? Corvin demanded. Who would? The front door opened again, and an older man appeared, leaning heavily on a cane. Lord Aldrich Wynne had aged 2 decades in the 3 years since Corvin had last seen him. His hair had gone completely white, his frame shrunken, his eyes hollow. Your Grace. His voice was barely a whisper. You've returned. Lord Aldrich, Corvin forced steadiness into his tone. I appear to have missed some rather significant developments. The old man's face crumpled. Forgive me, forgive us. I tried to write, but I didn't know how to. My daughter, my eldest, she has disgraced us beyond measure. Father. The word was soft, barely audible. Everyone froze. Corvin turned to Mylas, stunned. She had spoken. Her voice was rusty, unused, barely more than a breath. But she had spoken. Her eyes were fixed on her father, filled with warning. Then she wrote rapidly in her journal and held it up. Not here. Not in the drive. He is unwell. Please. It was the please that stopped him. Something about the desperate dignity of it. The silent woman, using her first word in God, knew how long to protect her failing father. Corvin looked between them, the broken patriarch, the silent sister, and felt the shape of catastrophe pressing in from all sides. Very well, he straightened, calling upon every ounce of aristocratic composure he possessed. Let us go inside, and then, Miss Wynne, you will tell me everything. Mylas nodded once, but as she turned toward the house, Corvin caught the look that crossed her face, relief and something else. Something that looked almost like hope, and he wondered, for the first time, what exactly he had returned to. The drawing room smelled of dust and disuse. Corvin noted the sheets covering the furniture, the empty vases where flowers should have been, the cold hearth despite the autumn chill. Windhollow had been a warm house once, full of life and laughter. Now it felt like a mausoleum. Lord Aldrich collapsed into a chair, his breathing labored. A servant appeared. Only one, Corvin noticed, where there should have been a dozen, and pressed a glass of brandy into the old man's trembling hands. The staff? Corvin asked quietly. Mylas wrote. Most dismissed after Theodine left. We could not afford to keep them. Could not afford. He filed that away with growing unease. Tell me what happened. He kept his voice level, though his hands wanted to shake. All of it. Mylas glanced at her father, but Lord Aldrich had closed his eyes, the brandy untouched in his grip. She began to write. Theodine was corresponding with someone during your 2nd year at war. A captain. Handsome, charming, present when you were not. I discovered it by accident. A letter left carelessly in the garden folly. Corvin's jaw tightened. Did you tell anyone? I told father. He confronted her. She's denied it. A month later, she was gone. Just gone? She left a note. She said she could not wait any longer. She said you might never return, and she refused to waste her life on a ghost. She took her jewels, her dowry portion, and left with Captain Marsh. Captain Marsh. Corvin knew the name. A cavalry officer of modest birth and immodest ambition. He'd served 2 regiments over from Corvin's own, known more for his charm than his combat record. Theodine had left him for a man like that. And the scandal? His voice sounded foreign to his own ears. The broken engagement. Mylas's expression flickered with something like admiration. Or perhaps pity. There was no announcement. Father wrote to no one. We told the neighbors that Theodine had gone to care for a sick aunt in Cornwall. We have maintained that story for 14 months. You've been lying to protect my reputation? We have been lying to protect yours and ours. If society knew she had abandoned a duke, we would all be ruined. Father's remaining business connections, my own prospects, everything would collapse. Corvin stared at her. You have prospects? It was a thoughtless question, almost cruel, but Melis did not flinch. She wrote calmly, I did. Before. A curate's son who did not mind my silence. He withdrew his interest when our circumstances changed. A curate's son. A silent woman with no dowry and a disgraced sister. Of course he had withdrawn. Miss Wynne! Corvin moved closer, studying her face. Why did you stay? Why not leave with your sister, or find some other escape? Melis met his eyes directly, and again he felt that strange pull in his chest, like something long dormant recognizing a kindred spirit. She wrote, Someone had to remain. Someone had to answer the door when you returned. Someone had to tell you the truth. You waited 3 years to deliver bad news. I waited 3 years because I gave you my word. Corvin went still. What word? I barely remember speaking to you before I left. Melis turned to a new page. Her handwriting grew smaller, more hesitant. The night before your regiment departed, Theodine threw a farewell dinner. You spoke to me once, briefly, near the garden doors. You were nervous, though you hid it well. You said, she paused, pencil hovering over paper. I said, what? You said, I hope someone will be here when I return. It was a jest, I think. But I answered that someone would be. You laughed. You did not take me seriously. Corvin remembered nothing of this conversation, but he could imagine it. Himself young, foolish, drunk on the romance of war, making careless comments to the forgettable sister of his beautiful fiancée. You waited 3 years because of something I said, while half in my cups? Melis's eyes held his. She wrote, I waited because it was the right thing to do. Because you deserved to know what happened to your face, not through whispers and rumor. Because my family owes you that much, at least. Lord Aldrich stirred, his eyes fluttering open. She has kept this household alive, Your Grace. Sold her own jewelry. Dismissed the servants she'd known since childhood. Nursed me through 2 fevers that should have killed me. All while her sister, his voice broke. All while Theodine danced at house parties with her captain. Corvin looked at Melis with new eyes. The faded dress. The careful economy of her movements. The journal kept always at hand, because she had no voice to speak her truth aloud. She had sacrificed everything to maintain a fiction that protected his honor. Why? The question came out raw. Why would you do all that for a man you barely know? Melis wrote slowly, deliberately. Because I believed you would come back. And I believed you deserved to come back to something other than ashes. The silence stretched between them. Corvin thought of the 47 letters she had written, the 3 years she had waited, the sister who had abandoned them all. And he realized, with dawning clarity, that the woman standing before him had given him more loyalty in 3 years of silence than Theodine had given him in 4 years of promises. Miss Wynne, he said quietly, I believe we have much more to discuss. She nodded, and in her dark eyes, that flicker of hope burned a little brighter. They walked in the overgrown garden because Lord Aldrich needed rest, and because the house felt suffocating with ghosts of what should have been. Corvin's leg ached with every step, but he welcomed the pain. It kept him anchored to the present, away from the spiraling fury and betrayal threatening to consume him. Melis walked beside him in silence. Her natural state, he was beginning to understand. matching her pace to his halting gait without comment or condescension. "I have a problem," he said finally. "Several, actually, but one that supersedes the others." She tilted her head, waiting. "I am 31 years old. I have just returned from 3 years of war to discover my engagement dissolved and my reputation hanging by a thread of lies. I am also, according to my solicitor's last letter, required to marry within the year or forfeit significant portions of my inheritance to a distant cousin who would very much like to see me fail." Mylis's eyebrows rose. She wrote, "Your father's will?" "My grandfather's, actually." The old bastard believed strongly in the continuation of the line. He stipulated that any Duke of Ravencrest must be married by age 32, or the unentailed properties, including the London house, the Scottish hunting lodge, and approximately 40% of the estate's income, pass to the next eligible male relative. That seems excessive. That was my grandfather, excessive in all things. Corvin paused beside a moss-covered statue of Aphrodite, her face weathered beyond recognition. "I have 11 months. Finding a suitable bride under normal circumstances would be challenging enough. Finding one while concealing the scandal of my former fiancée's defection will be nearly impossible." Mylis was very still. Her pencil hovered over the page, but she did not write. "You see my dilemma," Corvin continued. "If I announce the broken engagement, I become an object of pity and speculation. Every fortune hunter and desperate mother in London will descend upon me, and every eligible woman of quality will wonder what deficiency drove Theodine away. If I remain silent, I cannot court anyone new because the world believes I am still engaged." He turned to face her directly. "Unless..." Mylis met his gaze. A flicker crossed her expression. "Understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of it." "Unless what, Your Grace?" "Unless I marry someone who already knows the truth, someone who has reason to maintain the family's silence, someone whose reputation would be salvaged rather than damaged by association with a duke." Mylis's hand trembled slightly. She wrote, "You cannot mean..." "I mean exactly what you think I mean, Miss Wynne." She stared at him, her dark eyes wide, and he saw the moment comprehension fully landed. The journal nearly slipped from her fingers. "You want to marry me?" "I'm proposing an arrangement," Corvin corrected. "A practical solution to multiple problems. You need security, financial and social. I need a wife who will not ask inconvenient questions about my former engagement. We both need to preserve what remains of our family's standing." Mylis shook her head rapidly, backing away a step. She wrote with shaking hands, "This is madness. I am nobody. I cannot speak. Society would see a romantic tale," Corvin interrupted. "The Duke, wounded in war, returns home to discover his faithless fiancée gone. But her loyal sister, who maintained correspondence throughout his absence," he gestured toward her, "who waited for him when no one else did. That sister becomes the true heroine of the story. You want to lie to everyone. I want to tell a different truth. You did write me letters. You did wait for me. If we allow people to believe that affection grew from correspondence, that I transferred my intentions to the more worthy sister, it becomes a love story rather than a scandal." Mylis turned away from him, her shoulders rigid. For a long moment, she simply stood there, facing the dying garden, her silence more eloquent than words. Then she wrote, "And what would you expect from me, in this arrangement?" "A wife in name, at minimum. Someone to manage Ravencrest Manor. Someone to stand beside me at social functions. An heir, eventually, if we find ourselves." He hesitated, choosing words carefully. "If we find ourselves compatible in that regard. But I would not force that. I would not force anything. You do not know me. I am beginning to. I cannot be what Theodine was. I cannot charm ballrooms or enchant dinner parties. I cannot. I do not want what Theodine was. The words came out sharper than intended. I want someone who will not lie to me. Someone who will not abandon her family for a cavalry officer with good teeth and empty promises. Someone who will still be here when I wake from nightmares about the war. Someone real. Milas turned back to face him. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. You are asking me to give up any chance of what? The curate's son who withdrew his interest? Another match that will never materialize because your family has no money and your sister has destroyed your reputation. He softened his voice. I am asking you to consider a different future than the one you've resigned yourself to. She was quiet for a long time. The autumn wind stirred the dead leaves around their feet, carrying the scent of decay and distant rain. Then she wrote, her hand steadier now. I have conditions. Despite everything, Corvin almost smiled. Name them. First, you will never treat me as inferior, because I do not speak. I will communicate as I am able, and you will respect that my thoughts are no less valid for being written. Agreed. Second, if you ever take a mistress, I will know immediately. Not because I expect fidelity. I am practical enough to understand that may be too much to ask, but because I will not be made a fool. I will not be the last to know, as I was with my sister. Corvin's expression hardened. I will not take a mistress. I watched that particular arrangement destroy my parents' marriage. I have no interest in repeating their mistakes. Milas studied him, then nodded slowly. Third, my father lives with us. He has no one else, and he will not survive another winter alone in this house. Of course, Ravencrest has 37 rooms. I suspect we can find space for one old man. And fourth, she hesitated, her pencil pressing hard into the paper. When I am ready, if I am ever ready, I want to try to speak again. Not for society, not for ballrooms, for myself. And I need to know that you will not mock me if I fail, that you will not grow impatient with the silence in between. Corvin moved closer. He reached out, slowly, giving her time to retreat, and took her free hand in his battle-worn one. Miss Wynne, I have spent 3 years in the loudest hell imaginable. Cannons, screaming, death at every turn. Silence does not frighten me. Silence, I am beginning to think, might be exactly what I need. Milas looked down at their joined hands, his scarred and weather-beaten, hers ink-stained and capable, and her demeanor softened almost imperceptibly. She wrote, Then we have an agreement. He lifted her hand and pressed a formal kiss to her knuckles. Welcome to the family, Miss Wynne, or should I say, future Duchess of Ravencrest. Milas did not smile, but her eyes, those fathomless dark eyes, held something that looked remarkably like the beginning of trust. It was enough. For now, it was enough. Ravencrest Manor rose from the moorland like a stone giant waking from centuries of sleep. Milas pressed her face closer to the carriage window, her breath fogging the glass as the estate revealed itself through the morning mist. 3 stories of gray granite, towers at each corner, windows that caught the weak autumn sun and threw it back like challenges. Behind the main house, she could glimpse gardens that stretched toward distant woods, and beyond those, the silver ribbon of a river cutting through the valley. It was nothing like Windhollow. Windhollow was a country house, comfortable, modest, and human in scale. Ravencrest was a statement, a declaration carved in stone that the Ashford family had held power here for 400 years and intended to hold it for 400 more. Intimidating, isn't it? She turned to find Corvin watching her, something almost like amusement softening the hard lines of his face. She wrote, "It looks like it could swallow Wind Hollow whole and still have room for dessert." He actually laughed, a short, rusty sound, as if he'd forgotten how. My grandmother used to say that Ravencrest wasn't built to be loved. It was built to endure. Did she love it anyway? Ferociously. She died in the East Tower room, refusing to be moved to something more comfortable. Said she wanted to watch the sun rise over her land one last time. Melis looked back at the approaching manor with new eyes. Not just stone and power, but generations of people who had lived and died and loved within those walls. She would be one of them now. The thought was terrifying. The carriage rolled through iron gates bearing the Ashford crest, a raven clutching a sword, and up a drive lined with ancient oaks. Unlike Wind Hollow's empty entrance, Ravencrest's staff had assembled in precise formation. Footmen in dark livery, maids in starched aprons, a butler whose posture suggested he had been carved from the same granite as the house. "Hadsworth," Corvin said as he descended from the carriage, "I trust everything is in order." "Indeed, Your Grace. Welcome home." The butler's voice was perfectly neutral, but his eyes flicked to Melis with unmistakable curiosity. "And welcome to Miss Wynne. Her rooms have been prepared in the West Wing, as instructed." Rooms, Melis noted. Plural. She had grown up sharing a bedroom with Theodine until her sister's marriage prospects demanded separate quarters. Corvin handed her down from the carriage, his hand warm against her gloved fingers. "Miss Wynne will be staying indefinitely, Hadsworth. She is to be treated with the same respect accorded to any member of this family." "Of course, Your Grace." But Melis caught the glance that passed between two of the younger maids, curiosity sharpening into speculation. The silent sister of the runaway fiancé, moving into the Duke's home. They would draw their own conclusions. Let them. She had survived worse than gossip. The entrance hall made her stop breathing. Soaring ceilings painted with scenes of mythology. Gods and monsters locked in eternal combat. A staircase wide enough for 10 people to climb abreast, its banisters carved with ravens taking flight. Portraits of stern Ashford ancestors watching from every wall, their painted eyes following her progress, like judges assessing a defendant. "The house takes some getting used to," Corvin said quietly, appearing at her elbow. "I spent most of my childhood convinced the portraits were alive and disapproving of my existence." She wrote, "Were they?" "Almost certainly. The Ashfords have never been an approving lot." He gestured toward a doorway. "Come, there's someone you need to meet before you settle in." Melis's stomach tightened. His tone had changed, heavier, more careful. Whoever waited beyond that door, they mattered to him. The room they entered was a study, warm with firelight despite the gray day outside. Books lined the walls, maps spread across tables, the smell of tobacco and old leather permeating everything. And in a chair by the fire sat a man who looked like war itself had chewed him up and spat him out. He was perhaps 35, with a face that might have been handsome before something had carved a brutal scar from his left temple to his jaw, narrowly missing his eye. His left sleeve was pinned up at the elbow, the arm gone below it. But his remaining hand gripped a whiskey glass with steady strength, and his eyes, gray as gunmetal, fixed on Melis with an intensity that made her want to retreat. "So," the man said, his voice a gravel rasp, "this is the replacement." "Craddock?" Corvin's voice carried warning. "This is Miss Melis Wynne. She is to be my wife. I know who she is." Craddock didn't rise, didn't bow, and didn't offer any courtesy at all. "I also know who her sister is. Forgive me if I'm not immediately charmed." Melis felt heat climb her cheeks, but she held her ground. She wrote quickly and held up her journal. "I am not my sister." Craddock read the words, then looked at her, really looked for the first time. Something flickered in those gray eyes, not warmth exactly, but perhaps the faintest acknowledgement. "No," he said slowly. "I don't suppose you are?" "Craddock served with me," Corvin explained, moving to pour himself a drink. "He saved my life at Valdenhurst, took a cavalry saber meant for my throat, and lost his arm in the process. He lives here now." "I'm glad you survived," Maelys wrote, holding it up for Craddock to see. The scarred man snorted. "Are you? Most people look at me and wish I hadn't. Most people are fools." Craddock stared at her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, one corner of his ruined mouth twitched upward. "She doesn't speak," he said to Corvin. "But she's not shy about opinions, is she?" "No," Corvin said, and there was something like pride in his voice. "She is not." Maelys looked between the two men, the battle-marked Duke and his scarred protector, and understood suddenly that this was her first test. Craddock Thorne was the gatekeeper, and he had not yet decided whether to let her pass. 3 days passed in a blur of orientation. Maelys learned which hallways connected to which wings, which servants could be trusted with messages, which rooms were warm, and which held drafts that could freeze a person solid. She learned that breakfast was served at 8, that dinner was formal even when no guests attended, and that Corvin disappeared into his study for hours at a time, emerging only with shadows under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that spoke of battles still being fought inside his mind. She learned that Craddock Thorne watched her constantly. Not obviously, he was too skilled for that. But she felt his gaze tracking her movements through the house, noting who she spoke to through her journal, what books she selected from the library, how she interacted with the servants. He was compiling evidence, she realized, building a case for or against her. On the 4th morning, he cornered her in the breakfast room. Corvin had already departed for a meeting with his steward. The servants had cleared the dishes. Maelys sat alone with her tea and a volume of poetry she'd found in the library. Byron, well worn, with notes in a feminine hand that might have been the late Duchess's. Craddock entered without announcement and dropped into the chair across from her with the grace of a man who had long since stopped caring about propriety. "We need to talk," he said. Maelys set down her teacup and retrieved her journal. "About what?" "About what you're really doing here." "I believe that's been explained. The Duke and I have an arrangement." "An arrangement?" Craddock's lip curled. "That's what Theodine called it too at first. An understanding. A meeting of minds. She was very convincing, your sister. Beautiful and bright and everything Corvin thought he wanted." Maelys's hand tightened on her pencil, but she kept her expression neutral. "I am not Theodine. So you keep saying. But here's what I know about your family, Miss Wynne." He leaned forward, his gray eyes hard as flint. "Your father is bankrupt. Your estate is crumbling. Your sister destroyed your reputation before she fled. You have nothing. No money, no prospects, no future worth speaking of. And now, conveniently, you're engaged to one of the wealthiest men in England. You think I'm a fortune hunter. I think you'd have to be an idiot not to see the opportunity. And whatever else you are, you're clearly not an idiot." Maelys forced herself to breathe slowly. She wrote, "What would you have me do? Refuse his offer? Return to Windhollow and watch my father die in poverty? Spend the rest of my life as a burden to distant relatives who resent my existence? I would have you be honest about your motives." "My motives are survival. His motives are equally practical. We are not pretending this is a love match." "Not yet." Craddock's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "But that's how it starts, isn't it? Practical arrangements, mutual convenience. And then one party begins to feel more than they should, and the other party—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. I watched him nearly destroy himself over your sister. For 2 years after she stopped writing, he convinced himself something had happened to her, that she was ill, or injured, or being kept from him somehow. He wouldn't hear a word against her, and when he finally returned home and discovered the truth, Milas waited, her pulse racing. I have never seen a man so broken, Craddock finished quietly. He didn't eat for 3 days, barely slept for a week. He told me he wished he'd died at Valdenhurst, because at least then, he'd have died believing in something. The words hit Milas like physical blows. She had known Corvin was hurt. His proposal had made that clear. But this was something else. This was devastation. I did not know, she wrote, her hand trembling slightly. I knew he was grieving, but I did not realize the depth of it. He hides it well. Too well, sometimes. Craddock studied her face, searching for something. Your sister was very good at performing emotion. She could cry on command. Did you know that? I saw her do it once, when she wanted something from Corvin. Tears rolling down her face, voice breaking, the whole theatrical production, and 5 minutes later, she was laughing with her friends as if nothing had happened. I cannot cry on command. Milas met his eyes directly. I can barely speak at all. Everything I feel, you can see in my face or read in my words. I have no talent for deception. Everyone has a talent for deception when the stakes are high enough. Then test me. The words came out fierce, her pencil pressing hard into the paper. Test me however you like. Ask me anything. Put me through whatever trials you think necessary. But do not punish me for my sister's sins. I have spent my entire life being compared to her and found wanting. I will not continue that pattern here. Craddock was silent for a long moment. The fire crackled in the hearth. Somewhere distant, a clock chimed the hour. Your sister wrote him letters, he said finally. In the beginning, love letters, filled with promises and devotion. He kept every one. Read them over and over during the worst nights, when the nightmares wouldn't let him sleep. Milas nodded slowly. She knew about the letters. She had seen Theodine writing them, perfuming the paper, sealing them with elaborate care. After she stopped writing, he kept checking the post, every day for months, hoping for word. And now you tell me you wrote to him 47 times, and he received none of them. That is the truth. Can you prove it? Milas hesitated. Then she wrote. I kept copies, drafts of every letter, in a journal at Windhollow. I can send for them if you require evidence. Surprise registered on Craddock's face. You kept copies of letters to a man who was engaged to your sister? I kept copies because they were the only meaningful writing I had ever done. Because for the first time in my life, I had something to say that mattered. Because... She stopped, her cheeks flushing. Because what? Milas looked down at her journal, then back up at his scarred face. Honesty, she reminded herself. He wanted honesty. Because I admired him. From a distance, through Theodine's stories, through the glimpses I caught at family gatherings. He was kind to me when no one else bothered. He asked me once what I was reading, and actually listened when I wrote my answer. He was the first person who treated my silence as something other than a deficiency. Craddock absorbed this in silence. I am not in love with him, Milas continued, her writing growing faster. I am not naive enough to confuse gratitude with romance. But I respected him. I worried for him during the war. And when my sister abandoned him, I was angry, genuinely, deeply angry, on his behalf. That is why I wrote. That is why I stayed. That is why I agreed to this arrangement. She set down her pencil, her hand aching from the intensity of her grip. Craddock held her gaze, weighing her words. Then he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small, battered object, a brass compass, its glass cracked, its casing dented. "This saved my life at Valdenhurst," he said. "A bullet meant for my heart hit this instead. I've carried it ever since as a reminder that sometimes the universe provides unexpected protection." He set the compass on the table between them. "I don't trust easily, Miss Wynne. The war burned that out of me. But Corvin is the closest thing I have to family, and I will destroy anyone who tries to hurt him again." "I understand." "I don't think you do. Not fully. But you might." He stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "Send for those letter copies. I want to read them." "And if you find them satisfactory?" Craddock paused at the doorway, looking back at her with those gray, unreadable eyes. "Then maybe, I'll start to believe you're not your sister." He left without another word. Mylis sat alone in the breakfast room, her chest tight with the enormity of what she had done. She had passed something. Not the full test. Craddock would require much more proof before he truly accepted her. But the first barrier. It was a beginning. The letters arrived from Windhollow a week later. Mylis had written to the housekeeper, one of the few servants who remained, requesting the journals be sent immediately. When the package arrived, she carried it to the library where Corvin and Craddock were reviewing estate accounts. Both men looked up at her entrance. She set the package on the desk and wrote, "My copies. 47 letters. Every one I sent during the war." Corvin stared at the package as if it might bite him. "You kept copies?" "I kept everything. I was not certain the originals would reach you. I wanted a record of what I had tried to say." Craddock reached for the package, but Corvin's hand got there first. "If anyone is going to read these," he said quietly, "it should be me." He unwrapped the brown paper to reveal 3 leather journals, their spines cracked from use. Mylis watched his face as he opened the first one, his eyes scanning her careful handwriting. Quiet filled the room, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sounds of the household. Finally, Corvin looked up at her. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes had changed, a rawness that hadn't been there before. "You wrote to me about books," he said, his voice strange. "About the weather, about the garden at Windhollow, and the birds that nested in the oak tree outside your window. I did not know what else to write. I had no news of battles, no understanding of war. I only knew the small things of my small life. You wrote to me about your mother's death, about how you stopped speaking afterward, and how words felt trapped inside you with no way out." Mylis's throat tightened. She had forgotten writing that. It had been late at night, 3 months into the war, when loneliness had cracked her open and spilled truths onto paper that she had never told anyone. "I should not have burdened you with that. You wrote that you hoped the letters would keep me company, even if you weren't sure they would reach me. You said—" He paused, his voice roughening. "You said that you imagined me reading them by firelight, somewhere safe, and that the imagining helped you sleep at night." Craddock had gone very still. Mylis did not know what to write. The words she had committed to paper 2 years ago felt impossibly intimate now, exposed in the light of day. Corvin closed the journal gently. "I wish I had received these. They might have made no difference. They would have made every difference." He met her eyes, and for the first time she saw something beyond grief and duty in his gaze, something that looked almost like wonder. "Do you know what kept me alive at Valdenhurst? The thought of coming home, the thought that someone was waiting. But I was imagining the wrong person." The words hung in the air between them. "Corvin, I need time." He stood abruptly, gathering the journals. "I need to read all of these, properly, alone." He left the library without looking back. Mylis stood frozen, uncertain whether she had just destroyed something or begun to build it. Craddock cleared his throat. "Well, that was unexpected. She turned to him, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Not quite approval, but something approaching respect. "You really aren't your sister, are you?" She shook her head. "Good." He returned his attention to the account books. "Because I'm starting to think he might actually need someone like you." The days that followed were strange and tender. Corvin read her letters slowly, 1 or 2 each evening, and each morning his demeanor toward her altered almost imperceptibly. He began seeking her out for walks in the garden despite the cold. He asked questions about her childhood, her mother, the day she stopped speaking. He shared stories of his own, the grandmother who had shaped him, the father who had died when Corvin was 19 and left him to inherit a dukedom before he was ready. The loneliness of shouldering such responsibility so young. They spoke in their fashion. He with words, she with her journal. And somewhere in the exchange, walls began to crumble. One afternoon, she found him in the library, staring at a letter she had written during the second winter of the war. "You were ill," he said, without looking up. "You had a fever for 2 weeks. You wrote that you weren't afraid of dying, only afraid that if you died, no one would tell me what had happened to Theodine. I was delirious for most of it. I barely remember writing that. You wrote that your greatest regret would be leaving the truth unspoken, that I deserved to know, and that if you couldn't deliver the message in person, perhaps your ghost could manage it." Despite herself, Malis felt a small smile tug at her lips. "I was apparently quite dramatic when feverish." "You were honest." Corvin finally looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. In 2 years of correspondence with Theodine, she never once wrote anything this real. It was all performance, beauty and wit and empty promises. She loved you, in her way. No. The word was quiet, but absolute. She loved the idea of being a duchess. She loved the security, the status, the life she imagined. But me, the actual man, he shook his head. I don't think she ever saw me at all. Milas moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. She wrote, "What do you see when you look at me?" Corvin said nothing for several heartbeats. Then he reached out and took her journal from her hands, setting it aside. Slowly, giving her time to retreat, he cupped her face in his palms, one smooth, one marked by war, and studied her as if memorizing every feature. "I see someone who waited," he said softly. "Someone who stayed when everyone else left. Someone who speaks more truth in written silence than most people speak in a lifetime of conversation." Her blood rushed in her ears so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "I see someone I am beginning to—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "It's too soon. I know it's too soon. But I look at you, and I don't see Theodine's shadow anymore. I see you. Only you." Milas's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't speak. She rarely could. But she leaned into his touch, pressing her cheek against his palm. It wasn't a declaration of love. Neither of them was ready for that. But it was something. A bridge being built between 2 broken people, plank by careful plank. "There's going to be a dinner," Corvin said, his voice steadier now. "In 2 weeks. A formal introduction of you to the neighboring families. It will be the first time society sees us together as an engaged couple." She pulled back slightly, reaching for her journal. "Will I need to speak?" "No. I'll explain that you communicate through writing. Some people will be cruel about it. Prepare yourself for that. But you won't be alone. Craddock will be there. I will be there." And if they ask about Theodine, his expression hardened. "We'll tell them she's caring for a sick aunt in Cornwall. The same story your family has been telling. By the time the truth emerges, if it ever does, we'll be married and beyond scandal. You think the truth will emerge?" I think secrets have a way of surfacing, but by then, we'll face it together. Together. The word wrapped around Melis like a promise. She wrote, I should probably learn which fork to use for which course. It has been a while since I attended a formal dinner. Corvin laughed, a real laugh this time, warm and surprising. I'll have Mrs. Hartwell give you lessons. She's trained generations of Ashford brides. She'll have you dining like a duchess in no time. I'm not a duchess yet. No. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the same gesture he'd used when they'd sealed their arrangement, but different now. Softer. More real. But you will be. Melis watched him leave the library, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched. This was dangerous. She was beginning to feel things that had no place in a practical arrangement. But as she retrieved her journal and pressed it to her chest, she found she couldn't quite bring herself to care. The evening of the dinner arrived with cruel swiftness. Melis stood before the mirror in her chambers, barely recognizing the woman who stared back. The gown was midnight blue silk, cut in the latest fashion, with delicate silver embroidery along the bodice. Her dark hair had been swept into an elaborate arrangement by the lady's maid Corvin had assigned to her, a kind, patient woman named Brinley, who had not once shown frustration at Melis's inability to give verbal instructions. You look like a duchess, she wrote in her journal, holding it up for Brinley to see. You look like yourself, miss, Brinley replied warmly. Only polished. A knock at the door. Craddock's voice, gruff but not unkind. The guests are arriving. Corvin sent me to escort you down. Melis took one last look at her reflection, squared her shoulders, and opened the door. Craddock stood in the hallway in formal evening wear that did nothing to soften the brutality of his scars. He looked her over with a critical eye, then nodded once. You'll do? High praise from you. Don't get used to it. But there was something almost like warmth in his gray eyes. Listen, tonight will be difficult. These people, the Ashford neighbors, the local gentry, they've known Corvin since he was a boy. They knew his parents, his grandparents. They think they have a right to judge whoever he chooses to marry. And they will judge me harshly. Some will. Lady Pemberton is a viper in silk. Lord Ashwick drinks too much and says whatever enters his head. The Whitmore daughters will smile to your face and tear you apart the moment you turn your back. Melis absorbed this information calmly. Anyone I should try to win over? Sir Aldous Crane. He was Corvin's godfather. If he approves of you, the others will follow eventually. Craddock offered his arm, an unexpected courtesy. Stay close to Corvin. Respond to questions through him when possible, and whatever happens, don't let them see you falter. She took his arm, and together they descended to the battlefield. The great hall blazed with candlelight. 20 guests had assembled, their faces a blur of curiosity and calculation as Melis entered on Craddock's arm. She felt every gaze land upon her like a physical weight, assessing, measuring, and finding her wanting. Then Corvin appeared at her side, and the weight lifted slightly. You look beautiful, he murmured, taking her hand from Craddock and tucking it into the crook of his elbow. Remember, we face them together. The introductions began. Names and titles washed over her in waves. Lord and Lady Pemberton. Sir Aldous Crane with his kind eyes and white whiskers. The Whitmore sisters in matching pink. Lord Ashwick already flushed from pre-dinner drinks. Each greeting followed the same pattern. Corvin would introduce her, explain that she communicated through writing due to a childhood illness, and watch their reactions carefully. Most managed polite smiles. Some showed genuine curiosity. A few, Lady Pemberton chief among them, radiated barely concealed disdain. How extraordinary, Lady Pemberton drawled, her sharp eyes raking over Melis. A silent duchess. I do hope you won't find society events too challenging, Malus wrote calmly. I find that listening more and speaking less often leads to greater understanding, Lady Pemberton. Perhaps you might try it sometime. Corvin coughed to cover a laugh. Lady Pemberton's smile froze on her face. Quite, she said stiffly, and moved away. Sir Aldous appeared at Malus's other side, his weathered face creased with amusement. I see you've already made an enemy, my dear. Well done. Harriet Pemberton has needed someone to put her in her place for 30 years. Malus showed him her journal. I hope I haven't embarrassed the Duke. On the contrary, Corvin is looking at you like you've just won a decisive military victory. Sir Aldous patted her hand. I knew his mother, you know. She had the same quality. Quiet strength that revealed itself when challenged. I think you might be exactly what this family needs. Before Malus could respond, the dinner gong sounded. The meal itself was a minefield. Malus had practiced the etiquette with Mrs. Hartwell until her head spun, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of navigating formal dining while also managing her journal. She couldn't write and eat simultaneously, which meant she spent most of the meal nodding, smiling, and hoping no one asked her direct questions. Of course, someone did. Miss Wynne! Lord Ashwick's voice boomed across the table, already slurred. I must ask, what happened to the other one? The pretty sister who was supposed to marry our Duke? Silence crashed over the table like a wave. Malus felt Corvin tense beside her. Across the table, Lady Pemberton leaned forward with predatory interest. She could lie. She should lie. Stick to the story about the sick aunt in Cornwall. But Lord Ashwick was staring at her with bleary, knowing eyes, and she understood suddenly that he already knew. That perhaps everyone knew, and the polite fiction had been maintained only out of deference to Corvin's rank. She reached for her journal. The scratch of pencil against paper was loud in the silence. My sister made a choice that brought shame upon our family. She is no longer part of our lives. That is all I wish to say on the matter. She held up the journal, her hand perfectly steady. Lord Ashwick blinked. Lady Pemberton's mouth fell open slightly. Around the table, guests exchanged glances loaded with meaning. Then Sir Aldous began to clap. Well said, Miss Wynne. Well said indeed. He raised his glass. To honesty, a rare and precious commodity in these circles. Others raised their glasses, some with genuine warmth, and others with reluctant acknowledgement. The tension broke like a fever, and conversation resumed. Under the table, Corvin's hand found hers and squeezed. Are you angry? She wrote quickly, tilting the journal so only he could see. I'm proud, he murmured back. You just did what I couldn't. Acknowledged the truth without wallowing in it. You gave them nothing to gossip about except your own dignity. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of courses and careful conversation. Malus found herself actually enjoying parts of it. The Whitmore sisters turned out to be less vicious than expected, one of them genuinely curious about how Malus had learned to communicate so effectively through writing. But the true test came after dinner, when the ladies withdrew and the men remained with their port. The withdrawing room was smaller, more intimate, and infinitely more dangerous. Lady Pemberton cornered Malus within minutes, her smile sharp as broken glass. My dear Miss Wynne, you must tell me, how did you manage to capture the Duke's attention so quickly? Your sister was engaged to him for years, and yet here you are, stepping into her place, as if it were always meant for you. Malus wrote, I did not capture anything, Lady Pemberton. The Duke and I found ourselves in circumstances that made this arrangement mutually beneficial. Arrangement? Lady Pemberton's eyes glittered. How refreshingly honest. Though I wonder, does the Duke know exactly how beneficial this arrangement is for you? A penniless woman from a disgraced family, Suddenly elevated to Duchess? I believe I know exactly what I'm getting. Corvin's voice came from the doorway. The men had rejoined them earlier than expected, and he stood now, with barely leashed fury in every line of his body. Lady Pemberton, I appreciate your concern for my welfare, but I assure you it's misplaced. Miss Wynne has demonstrated more honor and loyalty in the past month than some people manage in a lifetime. I would ask you to remember that when you speak to my future wife. The temperature in the room plummeted. Lady Pemberton went pale, then red, then pale again. Your Grace, I meant no. Yes, you did. But I'll forgive it this once, for the sake of old associations. Corvin crossed to Malus and offered his hand. My dear, I believe you wanted to see the moonlit garden. Shall we? Malus took his hand and let him lead her away from the battlefield. Outside, the cold air hit her like salvation. She breathed deeply, willing her racing pulse to slow. I'm sorry, Corvin said quietly. I should have anticipated Harriet's attack. She's been insufferable since my mother refused to let me marry her daughter 20 years ago. Malus wrote, 20 years is a long time to hold a grudge. The Pembertons specialize in long grudges. He guided her deeper into the garden, away from the glowing windows. You handled yourself magnificently tonight. Even Craddock was impressed, and he's impressed by almost nothing. I felt like I was drowning most of the time. That's how these events always feel. The trick is to drown gracefully. She laughed, a silent thing, just a shaking of shoulders and a brightness in her eyes. But real. Corvin stopped walking, turning to face her in the moonlight. His expression was difficult to read, shadows and silver playing across his features. Malus. It was the first time he'd used her given name without her title attached. I need to tell you something. She waited, her chest tight with anticipation. I've read all your letters now. Everyone. And I. He stopped, struggling with words in a way she had never seen from him. I find myself thinking about you constantly, wondering what you're writing in that journal, hoping you're thinking about me even half as often as I'm thinking about you. She couldn't breathe. This arrangement was supposed to be practical, he continued, his voice rough, logical, safe. But I don't feel safe when I'm with you. I feel terrified and exhilarated and completely out of control. And I haven't felt anything like that since... He stopped. Since Theodine, Malus wrote, her hand trembling. No. His eyes met hers with devastating intensity. I've never felt anything like this. Not with anyone. That's what terrifies me most of all. The moonlight wrapped around them like silk, and somewhere in the house behind them, Malus heard the clock begin to chime midnight. The days following the dinner changed everything. Corvin sought her out constantly now, for walks, for meals, for quiet hours in the library, where he read aloud while she curled in the chair across from him, her journal forgotten in her lap. The pretense of practical arrangement had crumbled, replaced by something neither of them dared name. One afternoon, a week after the dinner, Malus found a package on her writing desk. Inside was a beautiful leather journal, far finer than any she had ever owned, with her initials embossed in gold on the cover. The note attached was in Corvin's handwriting. So you never run out of words to share with me. See. She pressed the journal to her chest, blinking back tears she refused to shed. That evening, she wore the new journal to dinner. Corvin noticed immediately, and the smile that crossed his face, soft, private, meant only for her, made something bloom in her chest like spring after endless winter. There's going to be a ball, he said as they lingered over dessert. The Harvest Assembly, 3 weeks from now. The largest social event in the county. Everyone will attend. Malus felt a flutter of anxiety. Will I be expected to dance? Dancing is optional, but being seen is mandatory. He reached across the table and took her hand. It will be our first public appearance as an engaged couple, our chance to silence the whispers once and for all, or amplify them. I have faith in you. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. You've already survived, Lady Pemberton. The Harvest Assembly will be nothing compared to that. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe in all of it. The arrangement that had become something more, the future stretching before them, the impossible hope that had taken root in her heart. But hope was a dangerous thing. Hope could be shattered. The shattering came 2 weeks later. Miles was in the library, reviewing household accounts with Mrs. Hartwell, when the door burst open and Craddock strode in. His face was ashen beneath his scars. "Where's Corvin?" "In the village, meeting with the tenant farmers." "What's wrong?" Craddock thrust a letter at her. "This just arrived. Express rider from London." Miles took the letter with trembling hands. The seal was unfamiliar. A rampant lion, crudely stamped in red wax. She opened it and began to read. "To His Grace, the Duke of Ravencrest, I write to inform you that your former fiancée, Miss Theodine Wynne, has returned to London. She is currently residing at the home of Mrs. Arabella Thornwood in Mayfair, and has expressed her desire to speak with you at your earliest convenience. She wishes you to know that her association with Captain Marsh has ended, and that she deeply regrets the pain her departure caused. She hopes that reconciliation might still be possible. Your humble servant, J. Blackwood, Esquire." The letter fell from Milas's numb fingers. Theodine. Theodine had returned. Theodine wanted reconciliation. "Milas." Craddock's voice seemed to come from very far away. "This doesn't change anything. Corvin is engaged to you now. He won't—" She shook her head, backing away from him. Her hands were shaking too badly to write. He loved her, she thought wildly. He nearly destroyed himself over her. And now she's back. All the hope she had carefully cultivated, all the tender moments and meaningful glances and whispered confessions, they crumbled to ash in her chest. She was the replacement, the convenient alternative, the sister who had been there when the preferred choice was not. And now the preferred choice had returned. "Milas, listen to me." But she was already running. She found refuge in the East Tower room, the one Corvin's grandmother had died in, the one no one used anymore. Dust covered the furniture, and cobwebs draped the windows, but the view was magnificent. Endless moorland stretching to the horizon, wild and empty and free. She stood at the window for hours, watching the sun sink toward the hills, her mind a tempest of fear and grief. When the door opened behind her, she didn't turn around. "Craddock told me." Corvin's voice was raw. "Milas, please look at me." She didn't move. He crossed the room and gently turned her to face him. His expression when he saw her tear-streaked cheeks was devastating. Anguished, furious, tender all at once. "You think I would go back to her?" She reached for her journal, but he stopped her, taking both her hands in his. "You think that after everything, the letters, the conversations, the way I feel when you walk into a room, you think I would abandon you for a woman who abandoned me?" She couldn't speak. She couldn't write. She could only stare at him with all the terror and hope warring in her heart. "Theodine returning changes nothing," Corvin said fiercely. "She made her choice when she left with Marsh. She broke our engagement, shattered my trust, and nearly destroyed me. And you," his voice cracked, "you stayed. You wrote 47 letters I never received. You kept my household alive when your own family was falling apart. You waited. But you loved her," Milas thought desperately. "You loved her, and I am only—" "I'm going to say something now," Corvin continued, his grip tightening on her hands. And I need you to hear it. Really hear it. She waited, her breath suspended. I loved the idea of Theodine, the beautiful, charming, perfect wife I thought she would be. But I never knew her. Not really. She never let me see anything beneath the surface. He released one of her hands to cup her face, tilting it toward him. But you, I know you. I know that you take your tea with 2 sugars and no milk. I know that you read poetry when you're sad and philosophy when you're happy. I know that you bite your lip when you're concentrating and tap your pencil when you're impatient. I know that you have the most expressive eyes I have ever seen, and that your silence speaks louder than most people's words. Mylis felt tears spilling down her cheeks again, but these were different. Warm, where the others had been cold. I know you, Corvin repeated softly. And I choose you. Not because Theodine is gone, but because you are here. Because you are extraordinary. Because somewhere in the past weeks, I stopped seeing our arrangement as practical and started seeing it as the best decision I have ever made. He pressed his forehead to hers, and she could feel the tremor in his body, the effort it took to lay himself so bare. I love you, Mylis Wynne. Not instead of your sister. Not because of your sister. I love you for yourself, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it if you'll let me. The words shattered something inside her, a wall she hadn't even known she'd built, a fortress protecting her heart from hopes too dangerous to hold. She pulled back just enough to write, her hand shaking so badly the words were barely legible. I love you too. I have loved you since before I had any right to. Since the letters. Since I understood who you really were. Corvin read the words, and his face transformed, joy breaking through like sunrise. Then he kissed her. It was not gentle. It was not careful. It was 3 years of waiting and hoping and fearing, compressed into a single moment of desperate connection. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling loose the careful pins. Her fingers clutched his coat, anchoring herself to him as if the world might tear them apart. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Corvin laughed, a wild, incredulous sound. We have a ball to attend in a week, he said, and a wedding to plan, and probably a very awkward conversation with your sister to navigate. Must we see her? Eventually. But not yet. Not until you're ready. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. For now, let her wait. She's rather good at making people do that. Mylis laughed, actually laughed, sound emerging from her throat for the first time in years. It was rusty and strange and utterly joyful. Corvin stared at her in wonder. You laughed, he whispered. I heard you laugh. She pressed her hand to her throat, equally stunned. The sound had emerged without thought, without effort, simply overflow of emotion too powerful to contain. Perhaps her voice was not as lost as she had believed. The fragile happiness lasted 4 days. On the 5th day, Theodine arrived at Ravencrest. Mylis was in the morning room when the carriage came up the drive, a hired conveyance, not the elegant equipage Theodine had always preferred. She watched through the window as her sister descended, looking thinner than before, her golden hair less lustrous, her movements carrying a weariness that hadn't been there when she'd left. For a moment, just a moment, Mylis felt a flicker of the old sisterly affection. Then she remembered everything Theodine had done, and the flicker died. Corvin appeared at her side, his expression hardening as he took in the scene below. She didn't send word. She just appeared. What do we do? We face her, together. He took her hand. Unless you'd prefer to wait here while I speak with her alone. Mylis shook her head. Whatever Theodine had come to say, Mylis would hear it. She was done hiding in shadows, while her sister commanded the light. They received Theodine in the formal drawing room, neutral territory, deliberately cold. She looked worse up close, dark circles beneath her eyes, a gauntness to her cheeks, her dress, once fashionable, now slightly worn at the seams. Whatever life she had imagined with Captain Marsh, it clearly had not materialized. "Corvin," Theodine's voice trembled. "Thank you for seeing me. I didn't have much choice, given that you appeared uninvited." Corvin remained standing, his posture rigid. "Say what you came to say." Theodine's eyes flicked to Malus, and something complicated moved across her face. Guilt, resentment, desperation. "Must she be here?" "Miss Wynne is my fiancée. Her presence is entirely appropriate." Fiancée. The word landed like a blow. Theodine flinched visibly. "So it's true," she whispered. "You're actually going to marry her. My silent, invisible little sister." "I was never invisible," Milas wrote, holding up her journal. "You simply never bothered to look." Theodine's eyes widened. "You're writing to me now. You refused to write anything for years after Mother died, and now—" "Milas has found her voice," Corvin interrupted coldly, "in her own way, which is more than I can say for you, who used yours to lie to me for 2 years. I didn't lie. You wrote letters full of love and devotion while conducting an affair with another man. You promised to wait for me while planning your escape. You abandoned your family, your honor, and your word." Corvin's voice shook with barely contained fury. "What would you call that, if not lies?" Theodine sank onto the settee, her composure cracking. "I was young. I was foolish. I thought. Captain Marsh promised me everything. Adventure, excitement, a life beyond the endless waiting. And when he failed to deliver?" Theodine looked at Milas's written question and laughed bitterly. "He gambled away what money we had. He drank. He grew tired of me when I was no longer useful for advancing his position. 6 months ago, he left me in a boarding house in Calais with nothing but the clothes on my back." The room fell silent. "I've spent 6 months making my way back to England," Theodine continued, her voice small. "Selling what jewelry I had left, taking work where I could find it. I came here because I had nowhere else to go." "You could have gone to Windhollow," Corvin said, "to your father." "Father won't see me. I wrote to him 3 times. He returned every letter unopened." Tears streamed down Theodine's face. Real tears, not the theatrical variety she had once deployed so effectively. "I have nothing, Corvin. No money, no reputation, no future. I came to beg your forgiveness and ask for your help." Milas watched her sister weep and felt the old familiar patterns trying to assert themselves. Theodine crying, Milas comforting, Theodine needing, Milas providing. "No, not this time." She wrote quickly. "You want forgiveness for destroying 2 families, for leaving father to die of shame, for abandoning me to manage your mess while you danced through Europe with your captain?" Theodine recoiled. "Milas, please, I wrote you letters too. Did you know that? After you left, when father was too ill to cope and the servants were leaving, and I didn't know if we would survive the winter. I wrote you begging for any word, any help, and any acknowledgement that we still existed. I never received any letters. Because you left no address." Melis's hand was shaking so badly now that her writing grew jagged. "You vanished without a word, and left us to burn. You do not get to return, now that your fire has died, and expect us to warm you." "Milas," Corvin's voice was gentle, "perhaps you should—" But something had broken open inside her, and words, actual words, were clawing their way up her throat. "You took everything." The sound that emerged was hoarse, broken, and barely recognizable as speech. Everything. Everyone froze. Theodine stared at her sister in shock. Corvin's hand found Milas's shoulder, gripping tight. "You're speaking," Theodine whispered. "Milas, you're actually speaking. Do not." The words came easier now, though they scraped like gravel. "Do not act as if this is a happy occasion. You lost the right to share my victories when you abandoned us." She was shaking all over, tears streaming, voice cracking. But she was speaking. After 12 years of silence, she was speaking. And she was using her voice to say no. "Corvin." Theodine turned to him desperately. "Please. I know I don't deserve anything. But surely, for the years we had, you can find some compassion." "I can find compassion," Corvin said quietly. "I can arrange for you to stay at an inn in the village while you determine your next steps. I can provide a modest sum to help you establish yourself somewhere else. But I cannot offer reconciliation, Theodine. I cannot offer a return to what we had." "Because of her?" Theodine's voice turned ugly. "Because of my mute little sister who wormed her way into my place while I was gone?" "Because of choices," Corvin replied evenly. "Yours and mine. You chose to leave. I chose to move forward. Those choices have consequences." Theodine's face contorted with rage and despair. "You'll regret this, both of you. She'll never be what I was. She'll never shine like I did. She'll embarrass you with her silence and her strangeness." "Enough," Corvin's voice cracked like a whip. "I will not hear another word against the woman I love. You will leave Ravencrest today. You will accept the help I've offered, or refuse it as you choose. But you will not poison this house with your bitterness." He rang for the butler. "Have Miss Theodine's belongings returned to her carriage. Arrange rooms for her at the Crown Inn in the village for 1 week, at my expense. After that, she is on her own." Theodine stood slowly, her face a mask of shattered pride. She looked at Milas one last time. "You always were waiting in the shadows, weren't you?" she whispered. "Watching, judging, waiting for your moment." Milas met her sister's eyes and spoke aloud, each word deliberate, painful, and necessary. "I was waiting for him to see me, and he did. That is the difference between us, Theodine. You needed to be the center of attention. I only needed to be seen by someone who mattered." Theodine swept from the room, the door closing behind her with finality, and Milas collapsed into Corvin's arms, shaking with the enormity of what she had done. She woke the next morning with no voice at all. The confrontation with Theodine had cost her everything she'd gained. Her throat felt scraped raw, and when she tried to speak, nothing emerged but a painful whisper. Milas curled in her bed, tears leaking onto the pillow. Of course this had happened. Of course the universe would give her voice back only to snatch it away the moment she used it. A knock at the door. She didn't answer, couldn't answer. But Corvin entered anyway, carrying a tray with tea and honey. "Brinley told me you were struggling," he said softly, setting the tray on her bedside table. "Don't try to speak. Just rest." She reached for her journal, but he caught her hand. "Don't write either. Not yet." He sat on the edge of her bed, his weight a comfort. "Just be, for a little while." They sat in silence as the morning light strengthened. Corvin poured tea, added honey, held the cup to her lips until she drank. He said nothing about Theodine, nothing about the scene from the day before. He simply existed beside her, a steady presence in the storm. Finally, she reached for the journal. He released her hand. "I ruined everything. You ruined nothing. I spoke, and now I can't. The voice came back, and I wasted it on her." "You didn't waste it." Corvin's voice was fierce. "You used it to say what needed saying. You stood up for yourself, for us, in a way you've never been able to before. That's not waste. That's triumph. It doesn't feel like triumph. Triumph rarely does in the moment. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. The voice will return. It's a muscle that hasn't been used in 12 years. It needs time to strengthen. But Malis, you spoke. After all this time, you spoke, and your first words were a defense of your own worth. She hadn't thought of it that way. I have never been more proud of anyone in my life, Corvin continued, and I have commanded soldiers in battle. I have watched men perform incredible feats of courage under fire. But what you did yesterday, facing your sister, finding your voice, refusing to be diminished, that was the bravest thing I have ever witnessed. Malis felt fresh tears spilling, but these were different. Cleansing. The ball is in 3 days. We can postpone. No. She wrote the word firmly. We will attend. I will not let Theodine's return derail our plans. Are you certain? You said we face things together. You said I would not be alone. She met his eyes. Did you mean it? With every fiber of my being. Then we attend the ball. And if I cannot speak, I will write. And if I cannot write, I will simply stand beside you and let them see that I am not afraid. Corvin leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers. How did I ever deserve you? You didn't, she wrote. But you got me anyway. The universe is strange that way. He laughed, a warm, genuine sound that wrapped around her like sunlight. The universe is indeed strange, he agreed. Strange and wonderful and far kinder than I ever expected. The days before the ball passed in a blur of preparation. Milas's voice returned slowly. First whispers, then broken sentences, then fuller speech, though it still tired quickly. The Dr. Corvin summoned explained that the vocal cords needed gentle use, not force. Speaking would become easier with practice, but she should not push too hard. She practiced anyway, in private, saying Corvin's name over and over until it felt natural on her tongue. Craddock found her in the library one afternoon, murmuring to herself. Getting ready for the ball? She startled, then nodded. Trying to. That voice of yours. He settled into a chair across from her, his gray eyes thoughtful. I heard what happened with your sister. The servants talk. Everyone talks. True enough. He was quiet for a moment. I owe you an apology. That surprised her. For what? For treating you like your sister when you first arrived. For assuming the worst. He looked uncomfortable, a man unused to admitting fault. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Another Theodine. Beautiful, charming, hollow. His ruined features twisted into what might have been a smile. Instead, I got you. Silent, stubborn, far too good for any of us. I don't know about that. I do. Craddock leaned forward. Corvin told me what you said to your sister, how you stood up to her, how you refused to let her diminish you. He shook his head slowly. I've seen men twice your size crumble under less pressure. You didn't flinch. Milas felt warmth spread through her chest. Craddock's approval was hard-won. She understood now how much it mattered. Thank you, she said softly. For telling me. He nodded and rose to leave. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, and this stays between us, I think you might actually make him happy. Genuinely happy, not the performance of it. He met her eyes. Don't make me regret believing in you. I won't. He departed in silence. But Milas sat in the quiet library, feeling something settle into place inside her. Craddock's acceptance, Corvin's love, her own slowly returning voice. She was ready. Whatever the ball brought, she was ready. The night before the harvest assembly, Lord Aldrich arrived at Ravencrest. Milas hadn't seen her father since leaving Windhollow weeks ago. The letters they'd exchanged had been brief, practical, arrangements for his care, updates on his health, nothing of substance. She didn't know what to expect when Hadsworth announced him. What she found was an old man transformed. Lord Aldrich stood straighter than she'd seen him in years. His eyes, though still shadowed with grief, held a clarity that had been missing since Theodine's departure. Someone had helped him dress properly, trimmed his hair, and restored some semblance of the dignified lord he'd once been. "Father." The word came out rough but audible. "You're here." Lord Aldrich's eyes widened. "You're speaking." "Sometimes. When I can manage it." He crossed the room and took her hands, his grip surprisingly strong. "Malis, my silent girl, you're speaking." She nodded, tears threatening. "I came to apologize," Lord Aldrich said, "for all of it. For letting your sister overshadow you. For being too lost in my own failures to see what you were sacrificing. For the years I let you carry burdens that should never have been yours." "Father, let me finish," his voice cracked. "When Theodine left, I wanted to die. I thought I'd lost everything. But I hadn't lost everything. I'd lost one daughter, the wrong one, as it turned out. I still had you, and I was too blind to see it." Milas squeezed his hands. "I was always there." "I know, and I took it for granted." He released her hands and reached into his coat pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. "This was your mother's. Her mother's before that. I should have given it to you years ago, but I was saving it for—" He couldn't say the name. "I was saving it for a wedding that never happened. Now, I want you to have it for your wedding. The one that should happen." He opened the box. Inside lay a ring, delicate gold filigree surrounding a deep blue sapphire that seemed to hold starlight in its depths. "It's beautiful," Milas whispered. "It belonged to women of strength," Lord Aldrich said. "Women who endured, women who loved fiercely and quietly and without fanfare, women like you." Corvin appeared in the doorway, drawn by voices. He took in the scene, father and daughter, the ring, the tears, and approached slowly. "Lord Aldrich," he said formally, "welcome to Ravencrest." "Your Grace." Aldrich straightened, some of his old dignity returning. "I've come to give you my blessing. Properly, this time." "Sir?" "When you first proposed this arrangement, I was too ill and too broken to understand what you were offering my daughter. A chance, a future, a life beyond the ruins I'd made of ours." Aldrich met Corvin's eyes steadily. "But I understand now, and I want you to know, she is the best of us. She always was. If you hurt her, I will find strength I didn't know I had to make you regret it." "I won't hurt her," Corvin's voice rang with certainty. "I love her." Aldrich considered him carefully, then nodded slowly. "I believe you do." He turned back to Milas and pressed the ring box into her hands. "Wear it tomorrow. Let the world see that you come from somewhere, that you have history and legacy and people who love you, even if we failed to show it properly." Milas threw her arms around her father, something she hadn't done since childhood. He stiffened in surprise, then softened, his arms coming up to hold her. "I'm proud of you," he whispered into her hair. "So proud. Your mother would be proud too." They stood there, father and daughter, healing wounds that had festered for years. When they finally separated, Corvin was watching with an expression of quiet joy. "Lord Aldrich," he said, "would you do us the honor of attending the ball tomorrow? As Milas's father, you should be there when we're officially presented as an engaged couple." Aldrich hesitated. "I'm not certain I'm fit for society." "You're fit," Craddock said, appearing from nowhere as he so often did. "I've seen worse at military gatherings. We'll clean you up, get you a proper suit. You'll terrify the dowagers." Despite himself, Aldrich laughed, a rusty, unpracticed sound. The Duke's scarred soldier and the bankrupt lord will certainly make an impression. That's the spirit. Craddock clapped him on the shoulder. Come, I'll show you to your room. We have work to do before tomorrow. He led Aldrich away, leaving Corvin and Milas alone. Your family is gathering, Corvin observed. Craddock accepting you, your father giving his blessing. Soon you'll have an army at your back. I only need one person at my back, Milas said, her voice stronger now. The rest is simply reinforcement. Corvin pulled her close and kissed her forehead. Tomorrow, we face them all, together. Together, she agreed. And for the first time, the word felt less like a promise and more like a certainty. The harvest assembly blazed with light. Ravencrest's great hall had been transformed, candles in every sconce, hothouse flowers spilling from every surface, musicians filling the air with music that swelled like hope itself. The county's finest had gathered in their most splendid attire. Every eye turned toward the grand staircase where the Duke of Ravencrest would formally present his bride-to-be. Milas stood at the top of those stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sapphire gown Corvin had commissioned for her caught the candlelight and threw it back like captured stars. Her mother's ring glinted on her finger. Her hair was woven with tiny white flowers that Brinley had gathered that morning from the conservatory. She looked like a duchess. She felt like a woman about to leap from a very high cliff. Ready? Corvin appeared beside her, devastating in formal black, his scarred hand extended toward her. She took it. No. Perfect. Neither am I. They descended together. The murmur started immediately, a wave of whispers rolling through the assembled guests. Milas felt eyes tracking her every movement, cataloging every detail, preparing judgments that would be delivered over breakfast tables for weeks to come. She lifted her chin and kept walking. At the base of the stairs, Corvin stopped and turned to face the crowd. The music faded. The whispers died. Every person in that glittering room held their breath. Ladies and gentlemen, Corvin said, his voice carrying to every corner. Many of you have known me since I was a boy. You've watched me grow, go to war, return home. You've wondered, I'm sure, what kind of woman would finally capture my heart. He turned to Milas, and his expression softened into something so tender that she felt tears prick her eyes. Tonight I have the honor of introducing her, Miss Malis Wynne, who waited 3 years while I was at war, who wrote me 47 letters I never received because she believed I deserved to know I wasn't forgotten, who saved her family when others abandoned them, who speaks more truth in silence than most people speak in a lifetime. The crowd stirred, uncertain how to respond. Corvin continued, Some of you will judge her for what she cannot do, for the voice that was stolen by grief when she was a child, for the words that come through written pages instead of spoken breath. His voice hardened. I pity you if you do, because you will miss knowing the most remarkable woman I have ever met. He lifted their joined hands. Milas Wynne will be my wife, my partner, my duchess. And if anyone in this room has objections to voice, I invite you to keep them to yourselves, because my choice is made, and it will not change. Silence rang like a bell. Then, from the back of the room, a single pair of hands began to clap. Craddock Thorne, his scarred face split in a rare smile, applauding with his one remaining hand against his thigh. Lord Aldrich joined him, then Sir Aldous Crane, then, slowly, then faster, the rest of the assembly. The applause built like thunder, washing over Malis in waves. She turned to Corvin, overwhelmed. They're applauding. They're applauding you. He lifted her hand to his lips. Now, will you dance with me? The orchestra struck up a waltz. The crowd parted to create a space, and Malis Wynne, who had spent her life invisible, danced with the Duke of Ravencrest, while every eye in the county watched. She did not stumble. She did not falter. She moved through the dance as if she had been born for this moment, which perhaps in some way she had been. When the waltz ended, Corvin held her close, his forehead pressed to hers. "I love you," he whispered, "with everything I am." And Milas, her voice rough but clear, spoke loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I love you too, with everything I have found the courage to become." Around them, the ball continued. Music swelled. Guests danced. Lady Pemberton watched with pursed lips that slowly relaxed into reluctant acceptance. But Corvin and Milas saw none of it. They saw only each other. 1 year later, the nursery at Ravencrest faced east, catching the morning sun. Milas stood by the window, watching dawn paint the moorland gold, one hand resting on the swell of her belly, where new life grew. Behind her, she could hear Corvin stirring in the bedroom they now shared. Not separate chambers, as propriety suggested, but together, as they did everything now. A year had passed since the harvest assembly. The wedding had been small and intimate, only family and close friends, held in the Ravencrest chapel on a snowy December morning. Milas had worn her mother's ring and a gown of ivory silk, and she had spoken her vows aloud, her voice trembling but clear. Lord Aldrich had lived to see it. He had died 3 months later, peacefully, in the guest room that had become his home. His last words had been to Milas, "Your mother is proud. I'm certain of it." Theodine had written once, from a modest address in Bath, where she had taken work as a music teacher. The letter was brief, formal, asking nothing, only reporting that she was alive and managing. Milas had written back equally briefly. They were not reconciled, and might never be, but they were, perhaps, at peace. Craddock remained at Ravencrest, serving as Corvin's steward and closest friend. He had taken to reading the letters Milas had written during the war. She had given him copies after the wedding, and occasionally quoted them back to her with his gruff smile. "You have a way with words," he had told her once. "You should write more. Not letters, stories," she had started. Slowly, in her elegant journals, she was crafting tales of women who waited, and women who spoke, and women who loved fiercely against all odds. Perhaps someday she would share them. But for now, she was content with mornings like this. Golden light, growing life, and footsteps approaching behind her. "You're awake early." Corvin's arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder, his hands joining hers over their child. "I wanted to watch the sunrise. And what did you see?" She leaned back into him, smiling. "Home," she said. "I saw home." He pressed a kiss to her temple, and together they watched the sun rise over the moors, the silent sister who had found her voice, the broken duke who had found his heart, and the future stretching before them like an endless golden road.